During my darkest hour, when sickness had taken my strength and debts had stripped me of dignity, I reached for the one hand I thought would never let go, my son's. But instead of comfort, he turned away, leaving me to face the cold silence of being completely alone. I never thought I would see the day when my own hands, once steady and strong, would tremble just lifting a glass of water. For most of my life, I believed my worth as a man was measured in what I could carry, on my shoulders, in my heart, and for my family. And for decades I carried it all without complaint. Bills, worries, work. I carried them so that my son would never have to. But lately, the weight has been too much. Illness crept in first, slow but steady. It stole my strength without asking, one day at a time. Then came the money troubles, piling on top of the sickness, and soon I found myself a man with empty pockets, an aching body, and a pride that was breaking in half. What hurt most was not just the weakness itself, but the way it felt to realize I had nothing left to offer. No strength to lend, no savings to fall back on. Just an old man, worn thin by time. And in those nights when the pain kept me awake, I would sit at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. I would shuffle them like cards, as if somehow the numbers might change if I looked at them long enough. But they didn't, they only grew heavier. Sometimes I imagined my neighbors talking about me. Maybe it was just in my head, but when I heard laughter outside my window, I wondered if it was about me, the man who once worked 12-hour days, now too weak to mow his own lawn. The man who used to shake hands firm and confident, now barely able to lift his arm without a wince. I used to walk down the street with my chest out, nodding to people as if I had all the answers. Now I keep my head low, afraid someone might ask Mouse how I'm doing, because I wouldn't know how to answer honestly. And the truth is, I never thought it would come to this. I never thought I'd become the kind of father who needed to lean on his son just to stand. If you've ever felt something like this, if you've known the weight of being forgotten or the sting of being too proud to ask for help, then you'll understand my story. And if my words touch you, I ask only one thing. Take a moment to like this video, to subscribe, and to leave a comment with your own story. Sometimes, just knowing we're not alone makes the burden a little lighter, because loneliness, that is the heaviest weight of all. I can still remember when life was different. Back then, I worked hard, sometimes too hard. My son was still a boy, and I thought every extra shift, every late night was worth it if it meant he would grow up never having to know struggle the way I did. My body was strong then. I could work sunrise to sundown and still come home and fix the leak under the sink or toss a football in the yard. I was proud of that strength. It wasn't just muscle. It was what gave me identity. I was a father, a provider, a man who stood firm no matter what. My son looked at me as if I could fix anything, solve anything, and for a long time, I believed I could. But no man stays strong forever. Time has a way of humbling you, stripping away the layers of who you once were. The hardest part isn't the sickness or the empty wallet. It's remembering who you used to be and knowing you can never go back to him. There are nights when I close my eyes and picture that man again. The one who worked double shifts without blinking. The one who drove his son to school in the old truck, whistling along to the radio. The one who had enough in his pockets to buy an ice cream on the way home, just to see his boy smile. That man feels like a stranger to me now, a ghost I used to know. And yet, even in my weakness, I still believed in something. I believed that when everything else failed, family wouldn't. That blood was stronger than broken bones, stronger than empty pockets, stronger than shame. My son was that belief. My son was the one thread I thought I could still hold on to. I told myself, it doesn't matter how far I've fallen. He'll be there. He won't let me go through this alone. But hope is a fragile thing. And sometimes, when you place it all in the hands of someone else, it breaks. Those sleepless nights became a kind of routine. The house would be dark, quiet, and I'd sit by the kitchen window listening to the clock tick. I'd tell myself, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow the phone will ring. Tomorrow my son will ask how I'm doing. But tomorrow always came the same way, empty, silent, heavy. I remember once I tried to distract myself by sorting through old boxes in the garage. Inside I found my son's school projects, drawings he'd made when he was little. One was a picture of us together, stick figures, me tall and smiling, him holding my hand. At the bottom, in uneven letters, he'd written, "Me and my dad, my hero." I sat on the concrete floor with that drawing in my lap and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry in years. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet shaking of a man who realizes that the boy who once called him hero no longer even calls him at all. And that's when it hit me. The weight I could no longer carry wasn't just the illness. It wasn't just the bills or the weakness in my bones. It was the silence. It was the loneliness. It was the fear that I had given my whole life to a family that might not remember me when I needed them most. There's a certain humiliation in becoming dependent, especially when you've spent your whole life as the one others leaned on. Asking for help doesn't come naturally. It feels like swallowing glass. I would rehearse the words in my head, thinking of how I might ask my son, but each time pride caught in my throat. Still I thought, he's my son, surely he'll see, surely he'll step forward without me having to beg. I was wrong, and that realization, that's when the real weight settled in, the kind of weight that no medicine can cure, no amount of rest can lift. The weight of being forgotten by the one person you thought would never forget you. I don't know if you've ever felt that. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe your children stopped calling, or a spouse turned away when you needed them most. If you have, then you'll understand what I'm about to share in the next part of this story. Because the night came when I finally did reach out. I finally swallowed my pride and asked my son for help. And his answer left me more broken than all the sickness and debt combined. But that part comes later. For now, I just need you to know how it felt to sit in that silence, carrying a weight I could no longer carry, waiting for a hand that never reached back. When I think back on my life, I realize that everything I ever worked for, everything I ever gave of myself, it was for my son. I didn't chase after riches, I didn't take vacations, I didn't buy myself new things. My pride wasn't in the car I drove or the house I lived in. My pride was in raising him. There were so many sacrifices I made over the years, but I never called them sacrifices back then. They felt more like choices, natural choices, because what father wouldn't give up a little comfort so his child could have more? I remember nights when I came home bone-tired from work, hands cracked from long hours. There would be just enough food for one good meal, and I'd push my plate toward him and say, "Eat, son, you're still growing." He never knew how many dinners I skipped, how many times I went to bed hungry so he wouldn't have to. And those shoes he wore to school, they weren't new. Most of the time they had holes in the soles before I could afford another pair. But I'd patch them up at night, using glue, thread, whatever I had. He'd wake up the next morning and slide them on, not realizing his father had been up late under a dim lamp, stitching them back together so his boy wouldn't be embarrassed in front of his friends. It wasn't just the shoes, it was homework spread across the kitchen table, me sitting beside him after midnight even though my eyes burned with exhaustion. I didn't always know the answers. Math had changed since I was a boy, but I stayed, sounding out words, checking spelling, nodding like I understood. He thought I was teaching him, but really, I was just showing him, I am here, always. There were bigger things too, like when he graduated high school, he wanted a suit, nothing fancy, just something decent to wear on stage. We didn't have the money for it, but I found a way. I worked extra shifts, picked up jobs on the weekends. I remember walking into that store, buying that suit, and thinking, this is worth every blister, every ache in my back. When I saw him in it, standing tall, ready to take his diploma, my chest swelled. I thought to myself, that's my boy, my pride, my reason. You know, fathers don't always say these things out loud. We show them instead, through the things we do, the things we give up quietly, without asking for thanks. And for years that was enough for me. He didn't have to know the details. He didn't have to see me counting coins late at night, or limping home after a long shift. It wasn't his burden. My belief was simple. A son should never have to carry what his father carries. And I carried a lot. But I carried it with pride. Even now, as I sit here weaker, older, worn down, I hold on to that belief. I tell myself that love doesn't disappear, that all those small things I did, they must mean something, they must count for something, because he wasn't just my son, he was the one person I thought could never turn away from me, blood of my blood, my only child. I didn't expect perfection from him. I didn't expect riches or constant praise. I only expected presence. A hand on my shoulder, a word of comfort, a reminder that the bond we shared still mattered. That's what I believed in. That's what gave me strength when my own body couldn't. It's strange how memories come back to you in times of weakness. These past months, when I couldn't work, when I could barely move some days, I found myself replaying old scenes in my mind. Little flashes of moments that once felt ordinary but now feel priceless, like the way he used to run into the house after school, backpack bouncing, eyes bright, shouting, "Dad," as if my name was the best sound he knew. Or the time he got sick with the flu, and I sat by his bed all night, wiping his forehead, whispering, "It's okay, son. I'm right here." Or those evenings in the truck, just the two of us driving home from somewhere, the radio humming low, and him asking questions about the world. I didn't always have the right answers, but I gave him what I could, and he listened, nodding like every word mattered. Those memories, they keep me alive some nights, because they remind me of who we were. They remind me that at one point I was not just his father, I was his safe place. And you know, there's one memory that cuts deeper than the rest, because it wasn't just an action or a look, it was words, words I've held on to for years. He was maybe 18, on the edge of manhood. He was going through something. I don't even remember what now, but I remember sitting with him, just talking, the way we used to, and he looked at me, serious, eyes steady, and he said, "I'll always be there for you, Dad." Simple words, 7 of them, but they sank into me like a promise, a lifeline. I carried them ever since. Whenever life felt heavy, whenever the world seemed to forget me, I'd replay those words in my mind. "I'll always be there for you, Dad." I believed him, with all my heart I believed him. And maybe that's why it hurts so much now, because when you believe in someone that completely, when you build your whole sense of worth on that belief, the silence that follows, it's unbearable. Sometimes I ask myself, did I expect too much? Did I make him the center of my world in a way that wasn't fair to him? Maybe. But what else was I supposed to do? He was my pride, my legacy, my proof that I hadn't lived in vain. And even now, with everything that's happened, I can't quite let go of that belief. A part of me still whispers, he'll come back, he'll remember, he'll keep his promise. Because those words still echo in me, not just as a memory, but as a wound. "I'll always be there for you, Dad." It's strange. The body can get used to pain, illness, hunger, exhaustion. You can find ways to endure them. But the heart holds on to words. Words can heal, or they can haunt you. For me, it's both. His promise once healed me, gave me strength when I had none. Now, it haunts me, because it reminds me of what I lost. And yet, I keep repeating it. Maybe because I need to believe it's still true. Maybe because I don't know who I am without that belief. So here I am, an old man clinging to words spoken years ago. Words from a son who once saw me as his hero. Words that still feel real, even as the silence between us grows heavier. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if he'll remember that promise, or if he's already forgotten it. But I know this. My pride, my belief, my love for him, it hasn't disappeared. Even if he turns away, even if he forgets me, I'll remember. Because that's what fathers do. We remember. We believe. Even when it hurts. I've always been a man who stood on his own 2 feet, not because life made it easy for me, but because I learned early that if you wait for someone else to carry you, you'll be left behind. When I was young, I worked jobs no one wanted, the kind that broke your back and wore down your pride. But I never complained. I did it for my family, for my boy. I carried the weight quietly, telling myself, as long as I can put food on the table, as long as my son has shoes on his feet and books in his bag, that's enough. So you can imagine the taste in my mouth, the bitterness, when the day came that I had to pick up the phone and ask my own child for help. It wasn't just about the bills, though God knows the bills had started stacking like bricks around me. It wasn't just about the hunger that gnawed at me some nights, when I pretended I wasn't hungry so there'd be a little more left over the next day. And it wasn't even just about the sickness that had been sitting in my chest like a stone, slowing me down in ways I didn't want to admit. No, It was about what it meant. It meant the strong man I once was, the father who never needed a hand, was gone, and all I had left was the hope that my son, the boy I'd raised with my own sacrifices, would be there to catch me when I stumbled. I remember that evening clear as day. The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV humming in the background, no pot simmering on the stove, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, the phone in my hand. Not dialing, not calling, just holding it. My thumb hovered over his name in the contacts, and for an hour I did nothing but stare at it. I rehearsed the words over and over in my head. How do you tell your son you can't do it anymore? How do you admit to him, the one person you always wanted to protect, that you've reached the end of what you can handle? I must have whispered the words out loud, soft and shaky. Son, I need a little help. Then I'd shake my head. No, not like that. Too weak. Maybe something more casual, I thought. Something lighter. Hey son, how you been? I just wondered if you could... But every version felt like I was stripping myself bare. You know, I used to think dignity was something no one could take from you. That it was yours, your birthright. But I learned that night, dignity is something you sometimes have to lay down yourself, just to keep going. And so, finally, with a deep breath, I pressed the button. It rang, once, twice. By the third ring, I almost hung up. My heart was pounding like I'd done something wrong. Then his voice came through the line. My son. Hey, Dad. Those two words, so ordinary, but in them I searched for comfort, for warmth, for the little boy who once ran to me after school, backpack bouncing on his shoulders, shouting, Dad, Dad, look what I did! But the voice I heard wasn't that boy anymore. It was slower, flatter, like he was distracted, already somewhere else. I swallowed hard, tried to keep my voice steady. Hi, son, how are you? We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and then came the part I dreaded. Listen, I said. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. Things have been tough. The bills are piling up, and I've been under the weather. I was wondering if you might be able to help me out a little, just until I get back on my feet. There was silence. Not the kind that comes when someone's thinking. No. This silence had weight, like the line between us had suddenly stretched farther than I could reach. Finally he spoke. I don't know, Dad. Things are kind of tight right now. Tight. That word hit me harder than if he'd just said no, because I knew his life, I knew the job he had, the car he drove, the vacations he posted about. Tight wasn't the truth. Tight was the excuse you give when you don't want to be the bad guy, but you also don't want to be the good one. I felt my throat close, but I forced a chuckle, tried to ease the tension. I understand. I really do. It's been a bit hard lately. I thought maybe, just this once, you could... But he interrupted. Maybe later, Dad. I'll see what I can do. Just not right now. His voice was distant, hesitant, like he wanted to hang up before I asked again. And so I did what I've always done. I let him go. I said, All right, son, don't worry about it. I'll manage. We said goodbye, and the line went dead. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, listening to the emptiness of the room. I wanted to believe it was just bad timing, that maybe he'd had a long day, maybe he wasn't thinking straight, that he'd call back tomorrow or the next day and say, Dad, I've got you, don't worry. I told myself those things because hope is the only thing heavier than despair, and yet somehow easier to carry. But deep inside, I felt it, the first crack in the foundation, the first whisper of something I never thought possible, that maybe, just maybe, the son I raised with my whole heart was no longer the son who would be there for me. That night I sat at the same table long after the call ended. No dinner on my plate, just silence and a clock that kept ticking, reminding me that time was moving on, whether or not love was keeping up. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up for him, helping with homework, waiting for him to come home safe, mending the little tears in his clothes so he wouldn't be embarrassed at school, all the things I never thought twice about doing. And now, when I needed just one small thing, the pause in his voice told me more than any rejection ever could. Still, I convinced myself. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he'd remote. Ember, I was his father. Tomorrow he'd call. I went to bed with that thought, clinging to it like a lifeline. Because if I let it go, if I admitted what that silence really meant, I wasn't sure I could face the morning. There are nights in a man's life that stay etched into him forever. Nights that don't need photographs or journals because the memory itself has carved its way into your chest. For me, that night came when my son chose to walk away. I had been feeling weaker. My body wasn't keeping pace the way it used to. Even walking across the room felt heavier, like gravity had singled me out for punishment. The sickness that had been nagging at me was no longer something I could hide behind a strong smile. And so, against every instinct I had, I picked up the phone again. The house was dark except for the dim lamp on the table. I remember the shadows it cast, stretching long across the walls. The clock ticked in the background, and with every second, I asked myself if I should really make that call. But loneliness has a way of stripping down a man's defenses. Hunger, sickness, and silence. Together they become a weight you can't ignore. So I dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Yeah, Dad." His voice was clipped, rushed, not like the old days when he'd greet me with warmth, when I could hear the smile in his tone. I tried to steady myself. "Son, I hate to bother you again, but things aren't getting easier here. I could really use—" That's when he cut me off. The words came quick, like they'd been sitting on his tongue, waiting for the right moment to come out. "Dad, I can't keep carrying your problems. You need to figure this out on your own." I swear the world went quiet, not just the line between us, but everything. The clock, the hum of the fridge, even my own breath. It all stopped. His words landed in me like a knife. Sharp, final. My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I might collapse right there in my chair. My hand trembled so badly the phone nearly slid. Up from my grip, I managed to whisper, "Son, it's me. It's your father." But all I heard on the other end was a sigh that carried more distance than 1,000 miles could explain. "I know, Dad, but I can't do this, not anymore." And then the line clicked, leaving me with nothing but silence. I sat there, frozen, my hand still clutching the phone, my ear pressed against it even though the call had ended. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, an hour, time had no meaning. I kept waiting for the knock on the door, for the sound of footsteps coming up the walk, for him to come back, to say, "Dad, I didn't mean it, I was just tired. I'll help you, I'll always help you." But the door never opened. The footsteps never came. The only sound was the old clock ticking away, each second pulling me farther from the man I thought I was, farther from the father I thought I had been. You see, I could have survived anger. If he had shouted, if he had told me off, if he had even cursed me for being a burden, at least that would have been fire. Fire means there's still something burning. But indifference? That's colder than anything I've ever known. I sat in the quiet of that house and asked myself the same question over and over. Why? Why after everything? Why after the nights I worked double shifts so he could have new shoes? Why after the mornings I went without breakfast so he'd have lunch money in his pocket? Why after every sacrifice, every prayer whispered over his sleeping head? Why would he leave me like this? The questions had no answers, just echoes that filled the walls around me. I thought about the last time he was little enough to fall asleep on my shoulder, his breath warm, his small hands gripping my shirt. Back then, I believed love was unbreakable, that no matter what the world threw at us, blood was a bond you couldn't undo. But that night ved me wrong, because it wasn't another man who replaced me. It wasn't a stranger, or even another family. I was replaced by something worse. I was replaced by indifference. Do you know what that feels like? To be erased, not by hate, but by nothing at all? It's like shouting into a canyon and hearing no echo. Like your existence has become invisible to the very person you gave everything for. I sat there, staring at the silent phone, realizing this was the moment, the turning point. The night my son chose to walk away from me, not in body, but in heart. And I can't tell you how heavy that realization is. It doesn't crush you all at once. No, it settles in slowly, like frost creeping over glass. Every minute that passes, you feel it spread a little further, until the warmth you used to know is covered completely. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, asking the walls the questions he wouldn't answer. Was I too hard on him when he was young? Did I make him feel small when I thought I was guiding him? Did I fail him somehow, in ways I never saw? The mind goes in circles when your heart is breaking. You look for fault lines in the past, cracks you never noticed, trying to explain the present pain. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about what I did or didn't do. It was about the choice he made. And the choice was this: to leave me alone, when all I ever wanted was to stand by his side until my last breath. That night taught me something I never wanted to learn. That sometimes, the people you love the most will not only turn away, but they'll convince themselves they had no choice in doing so. And the father who once believed his son would always be his pride, his hope, his legacy, was left sitting in a quiet house, with nothing but silence for company. That silence, it still speaks louder than words. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't soothe you. It doesn't bring peace. It just reminds you of everything that used to live inside the noise. After that night, the night my son told me to figure things out, but on my own, the house changed. Or maybe it didn't change at all. Maybe it was me who changed, and that made everything around me feel different. The walls were the same, the furniture hadn't moved, but suddenly, every corner felt bigger, emptier, like the space itself was reminding me just how alone I was. Days started blending into nights. I couldn't tell one from the other anymore. I would wake in the morning, but there was no reason to rush, no reason to move with purpose. The hours stretched long, heavy, and endless. I stopped opening the curtains. There was no need to let the light in. Light only made the silence feel louder. At least in the dark, I could convince myself the world outside had gone quiet too. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Once upon a time, that chair belonged to my son. He'd sit there with his books spread out, asking me questions about math I barely remembered, or telling me about some game he played with his friends. Sometimes he'd sit there late into the evening, his head bent over homework, while I dozed off with a cup of coffee gone cold beside me. Now the chair stayed empty, every morning, every night, just a hollow space where life used to sit. On the wall above the table, his photographs still hung. I never took them down. I couldn't. Each picture carried a memory I didn't want to let go of, even if remembering hurt more than forgetting. There he was at 5 years old, grinning with a gap-toothed smile, holding the kite I built for him. There he was at 12, standing awkwardly in a suit for his first school dance, his tie crooked because I didn't know how to tie it properly. And there he was at 18, standing tall in his graduation gown, looking out at a world wide open before him. I used to stare at those photographs like they were windows into another world, a world where I still mattered. The bookshelf in the corner gathered dust. I noticed it more than ever because we had built it together when he was a teenager. It was a weekend project, just a few wooden boards, some nails, and my old hammer. I can still hear the sound of him laughing when he bent a nail sideways and said, "Guess I'm not cut out to be a carpenter, huh, Dad?" And I told him, "That's all right, son. You don't need to be. You just need to be you." Now, dust collected on the very shelves we once touched together, and I couldn't bring myself to clean it. Maybe I was afraid that if I wiped it away, I'd wipe away the last traces of his hands too. Loneliness isn't just silence. It's the memory of voices that once filled the air. It's hearing echoes of laughter in rooms that haven't known laughter for years. It's the ghost of footsteps on the stairs that will never sound again. At first, I tried to keep living normally. I told myself I'd still cook meals, still keep the house tidy, still answer the phone when it rang. But with each passing day, I felt less and less like doing any of it. The stove stayed cold more often than not. Some nights I'd eat a slice of bread and call it dinner. Other nights, I wouldn't eat at all. Hunger became just another form of silence, something I could ignore if I kept still long enough. I stopped answering the phone. The ring used to give me hope, used to make me wonder if maybe this time it was him. But too many times it was no one important. A neighbor, a salesman, a wrong number. Every time it wasn't his voice, the wound grew deeper. So eventually, I let it ring. I let it ring until it stopped, until the house returned to its quiet state. When I did leave the house, I walked past neighbors with a polite smile. I nodded when they said hello, waved when they waved, but inside, I was carrying something they couldn't see. A wound that didn't bleed but ached all the same. It's strange how you can move through the world looking whole while feeling broken. Inside, people saw me and thought I was just another man growing older, slowing down with time. They didn't see the nights I sat alone, staring at photographs that no longer smiled back. They didn't hear the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. Sometimes I'd hear families in the neighborhood, laughter spilling out of open windows, kids chasing each other in the yard. And though I smiled to myself, a part of me felt that twist in the chest, that reminder that once, not so long ago, I had that too. It's the little things that hurt the most. The empty chair, the dusty bookshelf, the unopened curtains, the unanswered phone. Those aren't just objects or habits. They're reminders, constant reminders that what once was full is now hollow. I think the hardest part was realizing how quickly absence becomes the new normal. At first, I fought it. I told myself things would change, that he'd come around, that this silence was temporary. But after enough days, enough nights, you stop waiting for the sound of footsteps at the door. You stop holding your breath for the phone to ring with the right voice on the other end. You just accept it. You accept that the house is empty, and maybe it always will be. And yet, I never stopped hoping completely. Even as I closed the curtains and turned away from the world, a part of me still carried that quiet hope. The hope that one day the absence would end. That one day I'd hear the sound of keys in the lock, and my son would step through the door, carrying not excuses, not hesitation, but love. Until then, I lived in a house that echoed with absence, and the echoes became my only company. Nights became the hardest part of my days, when the world went quiet, when the traffic faded outside, when the neighbors had long since turned off their lights. That's when my mind decided it would not leave me in peace. I would lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick in the hallway. Each tick sounded like a reminder that time was moving forward, yet I was still standing in the same wound. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories crept in, uninvited. The first memory that always returned was the day I taught him to ride a bike. He must have been 5, maybe 6. His legs were small, the bike looked too big for him. He was nervous. I remember running behind him, my hand holding the back of the seat. "Don't let go, Dad," he said. His little voice still rings in my ears. "I won't," I promised. And then, in a moment of courage, I did let go. He pedaled forward on his own, shaky at first, but then steadier. The look on his face, pure pride, pure joy. He turned his head to smile at me, and in that second he fell. Skinned his knee, tears in his eyes. I rushed to him, picked him up, told him it was all right. That fall didn't matter. What mattered was that he rode on his own, even if only for a few seconds. That memory should have been sweet, but now, lying awake in the dark, it only burned. Because I keep asking myself, where did that trust go? Once he trusted me not to let go. Later he trusted me to guide him through life, and now he speaks to me like I am nothing but a burden. If you're listening to me right now, maybe you've been through this too. Maybe you've given someone your whole heart, only to feel it handed back like it weighed too much for them to carry. I don't know, but I know how it feels. And if you understand me, then maybe you could just tap the like button or leave me a comment. I'd like to know I'm not sitting alone in this. Another memory visits me often. His wedding day. He looked so sharp in his suit, nervous but handsome, standing there waiting for his bride. I remember the way he glanced at me, almost like a boy again, looking for reassurance. I gave him a nod, the kind only a father can give. Steady, proud, quiet. When they exchanged vows, I felt like I was watching the future unfold. A new chapter for him, for us as a family. I thought that day meant security, that no matter what, I would still have a place in his life. But lying awake years later, I wonder if that was the very beginning of my absence. If, on that day, I started to fade from his world. There are nights when I remember nothing but his laughter as a child. The kind of laugh that bubbles up from the belly, untamed, contagious. He used to laugh at the smallest things. The dog chasing its tail, me tripping over my own shoes, the way pancakes stuck to the pan. That laughter filled the house, and I thought it would always be there. But now, the silence in these walls is unbearable. I ask myself the same question again and again. What did I do wrong? Did I push him too hard in school? Did I not push him enough? Did I say something years ago that I can't remember now, but he never forgot? I go over every detail of the past like I'm replaying a movie in my head, searching for the scene where I failed him. Because how else do you explain a son turning away? How else do you explain the coldness in his voice when he said he couldn't carry me anymore? Those words, they live in me. You need to figure this out on your own. Isn't that what I always tried to teach him? To figure life out, to stand strong, to keep going? And now he uses those words against me, like a lock on a door that I can't open. The guilt eats at me. It sits heavy on my chest, night after night. But something strange has begun to happen in these sleepless hours. As much as the memories hurt, as much as the guilt digs into me, there's a small part of me that has started to push back. Because if I keep living inside these questions, if I keep tearing apart every choice, every mistake, then I'll never stand again. The betrayal hurts, yes, but clinging to it, holding it in my hands every night like some broken stone, that is what's truly breaking me. One night, not long ago, I sat up in bed around 3 in the morning. I couldn't take the memories anymore. I swung my legs over the side, feet touching the cold floor, and just sat there. I looked at the photograph on the dresser. Him at 12 years old, holding a baseball bat, smiling at the camera like the whole world was ahead of him. I felt tears rise, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I whispered to myself, "You cannot keep living like this." It wasn't strength, not yet, but it was something close. A seed, maybe. A small, quiet shift. I realized that the nights would not change. The memories would not stop coming. But maybe I could change the way I carried them. Maybe they didn't have to drown me. I'm not saying I've found peace. Far from it. But sometimes, in the stillness, I remind myself that love doesn't vanish just because someone walks away. It still lives in me. The laughter, the bike rides, the weddings. Those moments were real. They can't be erased. And if I let myself remember that, then maybe I can stand a little taller. Still, the nights are long. Still, the bed feels too big. Still, the silence weighs on me. But somewhere between the guilt and the grief, I feel something else beginning. The faintest trace of strength. I don't know where it will take me. I don't know if I'll ever hear his voice again, but I know I cannot let his absence become the end of me. And maybe that's the one thing these sleepless nights are teaching me. It surprised me, the way strength returned. Not all at once, not in some dramatic moment, but in the smallest of ways. The first time, it was with a meal. For weeks, I had eaten without thought. Just whatever scraps I could put together, bread with nothing on it, tea that went cold before I finished. But one morning, I found myself cracking 2 eggs into a pan, adding salt the way I used to when he was still at home. At the table, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was feeding an empty shell of a man. I felt alive, if only for a moment. It's strange how the simplest things, an egg, a chair, the sound of a fork against a plate, can remind you that you still exist. The next step was the house. Dust had gathered on every surface, as if the place had decided to surrender right alongside me. His photograph still hung on the wall, tilted, collecting a thin layer of neglect. One afternoon I picked up a rag and started wiping. Slowly at first. The bookshelf we built together, the old cabinet, the picture frames. Each stroke was like saying, I am still here. This place still matters, even if it's only to me. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Every photograph I touched carried its own ache. There he was on his 10th birthday, cake smeared across his cheek. There he was holding his diploma, pride radiating from his eyes. And there he was at his wedding, standing taller than me, ready to start a life of his own. Cleaning those frames felt like pressing on bruises, but I did it anyway, because a bruise, at least, means you're still alive enough to feel. After that, I stepped outside. It had been weeks since I'd walked beyond my own front yard. I remember how the air felt, cool against my face, carrying the faint scent of wet soil from a neighbor's garden. The world hadn't paused for my pain. Children still played in the street, dogs still barked at passing cars, and the sun still set no matter how many nights I'd spent in silence. At first it made me angry. How could the world keep going when mine had stopped? But then, as I stood there listening to the hum of life around me, something softened. Maybe the world wasn't mocking me. Maybe it was reminding me that I wasn't done yet. And that's when I realized something important. Being forgotten is not the same as being gone. I had spent so much time waiting for his call, waiting for the sound of his footsteps at the door, waiting for something that wasn't coming. Every day, I sat in that chair as if the phone would suddenly bring him back to me, but it didn't, and one day, I decided not to sit by the phone anymore. If you've ever been left behind by someone you love, then you know how much it hurts to let go of that waiting. But you also know it's the waiting that breaks you, not just the leaving. If you're listening to me now, and you've lived through something similar, I want you to take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what gave you the strength to keep going. Your stories matter, and maybe, just maybe, sharing them will help someone else find their strength too. Pause. Instead of waiting, I began to write. Not letters, not messages I planned to send, but memories. Little fragments of life I didn't want erased. The first day he started school, when he clung to my leg and wouldn't let go. The time we camped in the backyard because I couldn't afford a real vacation, and he still thought it was the greatest adventure. The afternoon we built that bookshelf together, his small hands smudged with sawdust, his eyes bright with pride. I wrote them down because I realized something. Being forgotten by him didn't mean I had to forget myself. Those memories are proof. Proof that I lived, that I loved, that I gave what I had to give. Proof that I mattered, not in some grand way, but in the quiet, ordinary way fathers do. And as I wrote, I stopped feeling like I was begging for pity. I wasn't writing to convince him to remember me. I was writing to convince myself that I was still worth remembering. That shift, small as it was, changed everything. I no longer look at the phone expecting it to ring. I no longer sit in silence waiting for footsteps that won't come. Instead, I sit with a pen in my hand, filling pages with pieces of a life that deserves to be told. Do I still feel the pain? Of course. That will never vanish. The absence of a child is not something you simply get over. It becomes part of you, like a scar. But scars, too, tell stories. They remind us not only of what hurt us, but of how we endured. And so I endure. Every egg I fry, every chair I dust, every step I take outside. These are not just habits of survival. They are statements, small, quiet statements that say, I am still here. I am not gone, even if I am forgotten. I've come to see being forgotten differently. At first I thought it was the end, the worst kind of death a man could suffer, to be erased from the heart of his own child. But now I see it can also be a beginning, a chance to see myself not just as someone's father, but as a man who lived, who gave, who mattered. I am no longer waiting for him to remember me. I am remembering myself. And in that remembering, I find a strength I never expected to feel again. There is a kind of justice no court can give you. No judge, no jury, no law can declare it. It is quieter, smaller, and maybe harder to recognize, but I've come to know it in my own way. It is the justice of still being here, even when I thought I couldn't be. For a long time I believed I wouldn't make it. The nights were too heavy, the silence too sharp. I remember sitting in this very chair once, thinking that if my heart stopped beating right then, no one would notice for days. That thought hollowed me out. I was certain it would be the end of me, but it wasn't. I woke the next morning, still breathing. I got up, put my feet on the floor, and went on, not gracefully, not proudly, but stubbornly. And now, years, or maybe only months, I've lost count. Later, I'm still here, still standing, still breathing. That, in itself, is a kind of victory. You see, my son may have walked away, but I didn't. I stayed. I stayed with the life I was given, with the body that still carries me, with the memories that ache but also remind me of who I am. He left me behind, but I did not abandon myself, and there is power in that realization. At first, I thought survival was too small, that if he wasn't coming back, then nothing I did could matter, but I was wrong. Survival is not small, it is everything. To go on, to keep moving through days that feel too long and nights that feel endless. That is no small thing. I don't know if you've ever had to live through being abandoned by someone you love, but if you have, then maybe you understand. The hardest part is not the leaving, it's the way it makes you question yourself. The way it whispers that maybe you weren't enough, maybe you didn't do enough, maybe love itself was never enough. I've asked myself those questions 1,000 times. I've turned them over until they've worn smooth in my hands like stones. And I still don't have clear answers. But I do know this. The love I gave was real. The sacrifices were real. The nights I stayed up helping him. The years I worked myself down to the bone just so he could stand taller than I ever did. All of that was real. His forgetting doesn't erase it. His silence doesn't cancel it. His absence doesn't make my love less true. And that, I've come to see, is the quiet justice of survival. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about making him regret. It isn't about someday proving myself to him. No, the justice is simpler than that. I lived through it. I endured what I thought I couldn't. I am still here, with all the love I carried, even if it went unreturned. If you're still listening, and if any of this feels close to your own life, I want you to do something for me. Take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments, because your survival matters too. Your love, your losses, your strength, they deserve to be seen, and sometimes the simple act of speaking them aloud is its own form of survival. Quiet pause. I used to imagine my ending differently. I thought when the time came, I'd have him by my side. Maybe holding my hand, maybe just sitting nearby, reminding me I wasn't alone. But life doesn't always unfold the way you picture it. Sometimes you're left with only your own company. And I've made peace with that. The wound will never heal completely. I won't pretend otherwise. There will always be a hollow place where my son should have been. But I have learned that a hollow place doesn't have to mean emptiness. It can also mean space. A space where I can finally see myself without waiting for someone else to see me. When I look back on my life now, I don't just see the night he walked away. I see the years before it. I see a boy who once laughed at my silly jokes, who once reached for my hand in a crowded street. I see a young man who stood tall in his suit on graduation day, and a father who beamed with pride. Those memories are mine, and they cannot be taken. He may never return. He may never pick up the phone or walk through this door again. That is a truth I've accepted. But another truth stands beside it. I am more than his absence. I am the sum of everything I gave, everything I endured, everything I survived. Some nights, when the house is especially quiet, I still hear his voice echoing in my head. That one promise. I'll always be there for you, Dad. It hurts every time it comes back to me. But lately, I've learned to hear it differently. Not as a promise broken, but as a reminder of the hope I once held. Hope is painful, yes, but it is also proof that I love deeply, and I will never be ashamed of that. So I end this story not with anger, not with bitterness, but with strength. Quiet strength. The kind you don't notice building until one day you realize you've carried yourself further than you thought possible. I am still here. I am still breathing. I am still alive. And that, in its own way, is justice enough.